All right, so Greg, you're in the studio. We've been talking about this idea of a studio consortium that really focuses on education and this new medium, this multimedia that we've been developing here in the studio, but really a video-based media that enhances teaching and learning.
Sure.
So it's a broad topic, and I'm wondering if we can today just talk a little bit about that. What your version is, what my version is, what are we looking at, what are we talking about in the development of how we move multimedia to a really scholarly activity, because I think that's the bottom line in this, is that we do a lot at the university as a professor at a university regarding scholarship. It's part of our job. We're teaching in the classroom, we're serving the community in the university and colleges and programs, and we're doing research. And so there's a piece of this that I think that has not gone recognized, at least as far as I can tell, and that is this notion of moving our multimedia production, the products that we make, to really meet the criterion, to meet the level of scholarly activity that is part of our job. And I wonder if we can talk about that today.
Yeah, sure. You know, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it because I think it's important. You know, when you look at historically what we do as professors in the academy, in an institution of higher education, a big part of our job is advancing the field forward through our research,
Right.
through translating research into practice,
Right.
Communicating with others, whether they be other professors or our students. A big part of this is communicating it in writing, in print media,
Right.
in a way that's acceptable to our professional standards.
Yeah, and excuse me to interrupting, but that traditional process has been to do a research project that it ends up in a submission to a peer-reviewed journal, and they reject that or accept it with revisions and so forth, and it has a very orderly structure to it, an introduction, a method section, results, and a discussion and so forth. So that's kind of the traditional method, that a single method really, that we have used to advance people in their promotion and tenure, for example, in their professional growth at the academy, as you say.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to go a step further with that and remind you that we're not just talking about, as professors, communicating our own research and writing traditionally through print media, but the same standards in print media hold when we write commentary articles within our field, when we write editorials within our field. There's a traditional standard we write to. There's a traditional review process, an external peer-reviewed review process we go through that really helps evaluate the pieces that are actually printed.
So
they're
it's not
evaluated by our peers,
right,
so that it's not anything that's written is published, and the
Right.
veracity of the claims within the piece may or may not be true. It's very different, for
Right.
instance, than publishing on the web.
Right.
Where, you know, everything you read on the web is not necessarily true.
Absolutely.
Doesn't necessarily hold water.
Right.
And
Right.
so a big part of within the field of universities, within being a professor, of being promoted, of being tenure, is advancing your scholarship. And a big piece of advancing your scholarship, a foundation of that, is through your writing, through your peer-reviewed writing.
Yeah, so it's not just that research article about the experiment or that survey research that you've had out there and you get it reviewed by the peer review, but it's actually perhaps some more commentary or discussion or innovation, some new creative technique. It may be clinical in nature, it may be training in nature that comes out in the written format.
That's
that
right.
is not necessarily just that format for the research article that that is so important to our discipline.
That's absolutely right. And what a lot of people, of course, understandably don't understand, who are outside of the field of teaching at a university, is the amount of time and effort that goes into creating a published piece.
Oh, that's
it's
very
not like
important.
you sit
yes.
down, I'm going to write an article, and by the end of the weekend you've got an article that's ready
And it's
to
ready to go.
submit.
No, that does not happen.
You spend anywhere from months to literally years on an article to get it published.
Someone mentioned 2-year mark on getting an article published in a journal. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So as a professor, you've always got irons in the fire. You've got something you're working on that you might be looking to publish 2 years from now, at the same time that you've been working on something and you're getting ready to publish within the next 6 months.
It's almost a continual cycle that you have to start something before the others finish.
Exactly. Now, what we're talking about is when you bring up this idea of the new media in higher education, and there certainly is a new media.
Yes.
For instance, video-based media.
Right.
It's the idea that that we recognize that there's more than one way to communicate professionally. We know how to communicate, and we have a process for vetting written pieces of work within our field, within our domains. But we really don't have that as it relates to communicating using video-based media.
Right. Well, I certainly have noticed that, and I want to talk with you further about that, because here in our studio, in COEHP television studios here, what we've done is really bring panel discussions, dialogue, demonstrations of skill, clinical practice, both students and with faculty in to really capture and produce a product that is scholarly in nature and discusses more than just what's in a typical article that's published, but to go on toward talking about its practical use. An article could be published, and then we come in maybe and talk about how you might use that in the particular discipline you're in and so forth. And that seems to me to be a very valuable piece of what we do here in the studio. So I'm wondering how this multimedia becomes scholarly. And what I'm hearing you say is that maybe this needs an external peer-reviewed approach that will begin to move this toward reaching that scholarly activity that's really acceptable to the promotion and tenure committees and other people that evaluate faculty professional growth.
See, that's exactly right. When you look at the use of video-based media, we've been using video within higher education since the 1950s.
Oh,
since
absolutely.
the dawn of television, quite literally.
Right.
And yet, over the last 60 years, we've not created a vetting process, much like we have for print media, the external peer-reviewed process. We haven't created that for video-based media.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we know that as teaching and learning continues to evolve, whether it's for teaching for K through 12 or post-secondary applications, the use of video, electronic media in general, will continue to become more important. It'll never replace the printed word.
No, of course.
But it'll take a center stage, and that's why we need to provide a system for peer review of video-based media.
Well, it absolutely makes sense. So let's stay with that topic a little bit. We've had so many conversations we in the studio here that we've recorded, people talking about the infusion of technology, online learning, and what students expect in online learning. There are poor examples of online courses, and there are some really nice examples of that engage the student in the process and increase the value and the learning value for the student. And so what we don't have is an evaluation of how that video should look. If you're doing your lecture, if you're presenting a skill or demonstrating some technique in sort of a clinical practice side of things, we have no way to judge that right at this particular point, and as a comparison with the traditional written version of things. So it almost begs the question, why don't we have that? And then what does it look like once we have a process that sounds like to me you're saying peer-reviewed video-based instruction?
Right.
Am I right about that? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm getting at here. Look, whether you're talking about distance education application or traditional face-to-face education application, there's no getting away from the fact that we can increase student engagement. And that's what we know is important in terms of
absolutely.
education. We can increase student engagement very easily through the use of multimedia, through the use of video as an example.
You know, that's the expectation of the new student. If you think
Exactly
about the
right.
new generation of students coming, they're all glued to their cell phones, they're on their iPads and modular devices and mobile devices, and so, well, and all wireless, by the way, too. They don't want a connection with that.
Right.
I found that kind of interesting. But the notion is that there's an expectation from the new generation of students, each generation coming up, that we have more and more video-based, very enticing and attention-getting material and there's some other arguments about the low attention span or short attention span that several people have written about. The Shallows was one book that we discussed on here at one point, that we're scanning and moving very quickly, not reading in depth on things. But that argument aside, that generation is coming that has the expectation of this very engaging, multimedia, video-based approach to learning, and we don't have it right now. I don't think we have it anywhere near what it needs to be, and we don't, as we were talking about now, there's not a process for us to develop that. And evaluate it, actually, to say this is good. You know, people have talked about the internet, and I've heard people talk about new media on the internet. You know, you got the quick YouTube videos that everybody goes to, and they have 6 million hits on the video for this little thing. Well, that's very short-lived, and the argument has been, and I've heard that it's the cream rising to the top. That really good video that's substantial and has value, and it teaches that the person has something, a message, that those rise to the top and stay. And that simply may be attrition or time or some other factors. But I think in this discussion, what we're talking about is very valuable learning material that we're going to use in the university level to engage the student. And that needs to have some evaluation process, some measure that says, yes, you, Miss Professor, have created this video product, and it is acceptable from a peer review group, and then we stand by that, and it should be accepted as scholarly activity for promotion and tenure, but it also should be of value to use in your course or to show others or share with others, like a consortium notion as well, that this is of value and it's got our stamp of approval. It's gone through a scholarly process and it's valuable to the larger community.
That's exactly right. When you look at the whole point of writing in terms of scholarly work, the whole point is to create something that communicates to somebody else in an important way. Well, multimedia, video-based multimedia particularly, is another way of communicating something to somebody else in an important way. In fact, I'll do this in my classes. I'll have video. We're talking about an instructional strategy. We're talking about a type of school. And I'll have video in the class that I'm teaching, and we'll say, let's take a look at this. Let's take 2 minutes to look at this and then talk about it. It's so easy to get into classrooms and get video these days. But you know what's difficult? As a faculty member, it's difficult to know, okay, how do I shoot something so that it creates a learning moment for my class?
Right.
How do I light it? How do I make sure there's sound there?
Good sound, yes.
And much like the writing process to create a scholarly article, it takes a lot of time, and it takes some knowledge and talent to create a scholarly video production. It's doable, but it takes time.
Yeah, so maybe there needs to be a rubric, a list of the essentials, and then some evaluation process or rating process, just like a peer-reviewed journal. And I've been on editorial boards, and we have our rubric to evaluate that manuscript that comes in. And you know, it not only has to have the subject matter and the content has to be on point for the particular journal, but it has to have the professional writing style. It has to be technically well written. It has to be in a succinct form that fits. And so we have that rubric. And I'm wondering that if that same process needs to be applied in this multimedia, video-based production review process. And maybe that there's a technical side that is the look as well as the sound you mentioned, and the supplemental materials that are on there, as well as the content and the engagement for the student, which is an interesting piece.
That's exactly right. And that's the whole point of this idea, is creating a process, a review process that, number one, teaches faculty how to create quality scholarly work in a video-based format in some way, but then also evaluates such work and recognizes it for such faculty. You know, if we're ever going to make any inroads in getting faculty to create stuff that is multimedia based, which we know is what we have to do, as you said, to address today's student and tomorrow's student in a more engaging way, well then we have to provide a mechanism for such faculty to justify putting in the time and effort to do that. And the way to do that is to create a process such that they can be recognized for that work as scholarly work. To date, we really don't have within our field a way of doing that very clearly.
Right.
And so what we're talking about is creating a way of externally validating this work so that a professor who's put in the months or sometimes years to create this multimedia, video-based multimedia type product can have it recognized as scholarly work as a part of their promotion and tenure, for instance.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. I think the promotion and tenure piece is very, very important to what we're talking about here, because that in itself, when it's peer-reviewed, externally peer-reviewed through a strong rubric, and it may be rejected, it may be accepted with revisions, but those kind of things, it's considered to be scholarly activity and accepted for promotion and tenure. You know, I often wonder, there's probably other ways that outside of our particular discipline in education and clinical practice and so forth, that maybe in the arts. If you think about a person in the College of the Arts who is a musician or an artist, how do they present their portfolio and have it evaluated for promotion and tenure? I'm really curious about the process. But it also, and maybe we can have someone come in and we can talk about that, but the notion that it is not sort of the research publication that we talked about earlier, but that it is more performance-based or skill-based, some amount of training and so forth and presentation, and that has to be evaluated. This process we're talking about for multimedia may not be that different from a more artistic evaluation for a professor moving toward promotion and tenure.
Right. If you think about it, you get into other domains such as music or the arts. When you think about how students or professors in those areas might show their scholarly work, it's through things like juried shows where they have a show and there's people that come through, juries that come through and evaluate the work, provide critical feedback. That's such an important foundational piece of their scholarly work in advancing their field forward. And really what I conceptualize here is a bridge between that kind of recognition, scholarly recognition, and the kind of scholarly recognition that within our field of education and counseling and education leadership, where it's print-based media and you have a blind review process to recognize scholarly work, really creating a bridge between the two that fits for this very odd new paradigm shift type media, multimedia that might be video based.
Well, there's so many examples out there. You know, I've said before on some of the shows here that if I'm really wanting to learn something new and I need it quick, I need to know now, I can't wait for 6 months or take a class next January or something, that I'll find a tutorial. I'll find an on-demand training module that walks me through and is well done, that it teaches me step by step how to accomplish something, learn a skill, see someone else do it. The mastery piece of it comes from watching the master do these kind of skills or training. Or like we've just done for the United States Army and some of our video work here in the studio, and they're moving to a very video-based training for their officers. So that's actually occurring at the United States Army level across the nation. and we were fortunate enough to be a part of that and help with that, is that they lead up to a point, stop, and then use that in the classroom setting. For example, a soldier leading his group into a field where they're not sure what to do next, they will get up to that point, stop, and then turn it to the class and say, okay, what would you do based on what we've been teaching you and you've been reading? What are your choices there and why would you make those choices? We can do that same kind of thing through dilemmas and scenarios, and we've actually done some of that around here, but it's beginning to get a footing and start to move forward, where you demonstrate the skills and then you have the person, the trainee or the student in this case, begin to try out those skills and give them feedback about how well they're doing. And so putting them in a practice-based approach through this video medium and the multimedia training and learning process. So it really is a pedagogy of how to do this training and teaching and learning through this multimedia, the dimension of multimedia.
Exactly, and that's the whole idea, how to do it well. And it's just like I said when we started, you know, people may not realize when you sit down to write a journal article, you don't sit down on a Saturday morning and take out your pen and say, okay, I'm going to write something up so that Monday I can get it published.
Right, absolutely.
There's some
Not
real
gonna
research
happen.
and skill that goes into that. And the same holds true for creating video-based media in the way that you just described.
Yeah.
You can't just sit down and go, okay, I'm going to take some video of something and create a scenario. You have to think about what your scenario is going to be. You have to storyboard it. You have to write the script. You have to get the lighting. You have to get the sound. You have to put pieces together that require some skill and some knowledge to make it scholarly. And that's what we're talking about here, is creating a process to recognize such scholarship.
You know, I was thinking about something. A friend of mine, Marty Jensis up at Kent State, always talked about writing the seminal article, the article that everyone else has to reference.
Sure.
You know, we all, that's kind of the gold standard. If you write that one article and everybody has to quote it. I think sometimes in looking at multimedia in the same way, and what we're doing in video-based work, is that if you create something that a lot of people go to use to develop a skill or learn something more in a particular area, that's the same kind of thing. That once you've got it and you've got it well done, and people recognize that and they continue to use it in that way. And if it's not, people may not use that. So there's, you know, when you write an article and you get it published in a journal, I've said this before, that, you know, I worked on it for a year or more, and it finally got published, and it was really nice to get that acceptance letter, and you finally get the published journal and it goes on your shelf.
Right.
Okay, and that's it. And I don't know, I guess I could go back and find that and flip through it and read it again and see, but it doesn't, it's not disseminated amongst a large number of people for use.
Right.
And I have
very
those
easily anyway.
not easily, and also it's kind of time stamped in a way too, that it's a while back and now some things have changed. In this multimedia, it may be that we can bypass some of that. We certainly can distribute through these content distribution networks that we're using for our television here, as well as other medium to distribute this in a large way, more so than ever, with more eyes on it, that helps people, delivers the content and the message, than you could with an article that goes on the shelf.
That's right.
And you have to go deliberately search for that so far to be able to get that. And it may be, as I said, time stamped. It may not be a viable product at that particular time.
Well, yeah, and of course then it begs the question, what's worth distributing and what's not worth distributing? And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that gets
here,
back to
is
the
creating
evaluation,
a
yeah.
system for determining, hey, this is worth distributing. And if it's worth distributing, then it's scholarly work. And then if it's scholarly work, we have a system for recognizing that justifies then a professor putting the time in to create such scholarly work.
So you're really, in our conversation here, which I really appreciate today, and I thank you for coming in and just having this conversation. You are talking about a peer-reviewed board, an editorial board, yes. Someone who, or a group of people who have sort of showed their scholarly work and are at a level to evaluate others, and that's exactly what the journal process is about, that you can get on the editorial board, but you have to first do your own writing and publishing to get there. And so if we had people on a board like that for this video-based notion here, this consortium that you're talking about, then they would be recognized people in the field. They would know what works, what doesn't, and make the comparisons using the rubrics and evaluation points and so forth. And that should stand up. I mean, that should make a difference with other people.
Right. And that creates a fundamental shift in how we motivate faculty to go beyond print media and to address today, not just today's college students, but tomorrow's college students.
Oh, absolutely.
Who are looking for, as you said, more than just the printed word to learn from. They're looking for multimedia.
Well, one of the things that we've come up against in the studio has been getting faculty into our studio and talking about their content area and the things that they're passionate about. And some people have, a number of more and more people have, in fact, but there's still the majority are out there that doesn't understand how this may help them in their professional development. And I think that what we're trying to do in the studio with the development of COEHP.tv and ColumbusState.tv as it's coming on soon, that a professor can come in and we do all the technical setup and the work, and they simply need to be able to talk about their content area, and it's easier. It's much easier than they thought it would be to be able to create a product like this. And then once you do it a couple of times, you realize there's so many other things that you can begin to bring in, and it just begins to snowball and gets you begin to think of creative ideas that you can bring in. Now, in the teaching and learning environment, in the classroom, it may be that you teach that same lesson you've been teaching for years and years, and we capture that, and therefore you use it. And I'll give you an example. One of the people who come in is talked about a lesson, and they taught the lesson on video and finished the lecture. It was sort of a mini lecture. And now what they do is they show it in class, and they have a discussion about that lecture. So it's almost like somebody said, the DVD commentary notion, that they begin to talk about the talk, and then you can talk about the talking about the content. So there's various levels that you begin to explore the content that we've never done before. We haven't done. There's some models out there, but that people are seeing that they can begin to take a simple first step to create the video and then use it in many ways, in many formats, on the cell phone, on the tablet, on the web, and on the DVD, and on the thumb drive, and on, so that it will do what they're exactly what they're trying to do, and that's make an impact on the student.
That's right. Right.
Great, thank you for coming in today. This has been kind of cool. I want us to come back and talk a little bit more about this educational consortium idea that you've been talking about, and the studio consortium, because we've done some things with teacher education, the colleges of teacher education. We want to expand on that and talk a little bit more about it. I want to hear more about this idea of scholarly activity from the video-based product that you make in a studio such as ourselves, and I really want to learn more about how that works.
I'd be glad to come back anytime.
All right, man. Thank you a lot. I'm glad to have you here. We'll see you next time.